The fertility specialist removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. Men had begged Kang Tae-jun for their lives without making him blink. Rival organizations had threatened to burn his empire to the ground, and he had responded by calmly finishing his dinner. But the next 7 words left the 60-year-old mafia boss completely motionless. "Mr. Kang, you will never father a child." Tae-jun stared at the medical report between them. Outside the window, Seoul glittered beneath the evening rain. Somewhere below, 3 armored vehicles waited to carry him back to the mansion, where 22 bedrooms stood empty. "Never?" he asked. The doctor lowered his eyes. "The injuries you suffered 20 years ago caused irreversible damage. There is no realistic possibility of you producing a biological heir." Tae-jun buttoned his black suit jacket and rose. He did not shout. He did not demand another test. He simply thanked the doctor and walked away as if he had just received an inconvenient business report. But inside the elevator, with no guards watching, Tae-jun placed one hand against the wall. For years, he had told himself he did not need children. He had an empire, thousands of employees, and enough money to purchase almost anything. Yet it turned out that a man could stop hoping for something and still feel devastated when someone confirmed it would never happen. 8 months later, Tae-jun stood in the private maternity wing of Seoul's most expensive hospital with blood on the sleeve of his white shirt. Behind the operating room doors was Grace Mensah, the Ghanaian maid whom his family had accused of seducing him, deceiving him and trying to steal his fortune. She was fighting to deliver 3 premature babies. His babies. A doctor rushed through the doors. "Mr. Kang, there are complications. We may be forced to make a difficult decision." Tae-jun's face went pale. "What decision?" "We may not be able to save everyone." For the first time in decades, the most feared man in Seoul looked powerless. His 82-year-old mother began praying beside him. His security chief stared at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. Then Tae-jun's nephew, Min-suk, the man who had expected to inherit everything, appeared at the end of the corridor. He looked at the blood on Tae-jun's sleeve and smiled. Not with sympathy, with satisfaction. That was when Tae-jun understood. The infertility report, the accusations against Grace, and the attempt to remove her from his home had never been separate events. Someone had been planning the destruction of his family long before he knew he had won. But to understand how the most dangerous man in Seoul ended up begging God to save a black maid and 3 unborn children, we must return to the night Grace Mensah first walked into the house that had forgotten how to live. If you love emotional stories about unexpected families, powerful secrets, and love that transforms even the hardest heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Stay with us, because the person Tae-jun trusted most was also the person determined to make sure his children were never born. 16 months earlier, Kang Tae-jun lived alone in a mansion built for a family he did not have. The estate sat beyond the crowded heart of Seoul, hidden behind black gates, stone walls, and enough security cameras to make birds reconsider flying over it. It contained 22 bedrooms, 3 kitchens, an underground garage, and a dining table long enough to seat 30 people. Tae-jun ate every meal at one end of it, alone. He controlled an international shipping network founded by his father. Publicly, Kang Maritime transported vehicles, electronics, and luxury goods across Asia, Europe, and West Africa. Privately, Tae-jun controlled an organization whose influence reached places respectable businessmen pretended did not exist. He had inherited violence, but he had never enjoyed it. He preferred negotiations to bloodshed and silence to threats. Unfortunately, his silence frightened people more than most men's shouting. For 35 years, he had expanded the Kang Empire while reducing its criminal operations. He wanted to leave behind a legitimate company. The difficulty was deciding who would inherit it. with no wife or child. Everyone assumed Tae-jun's nephew, Kang Min-suk, would become his successor. Min-suk had prepared for that position since childhood. He dressed like Tae-jun, copied his mannerisms, and referred to himself as the future of the Kang family whenever he believed his uncle could not hear him. Tae-jun always heard him. At 60, Tae-jun had accepted that his name would continue through a nephew who wanted his chair more than his approval. Then Grace Mensah arrived. Grace was 34, Ghanaian, and completely unimpressed by expensive men. She had moved to South Korea 4 years earlier with dreams of completing a hospitality management program. But when her father suffered a stroke in Accra, tuition money became hospital money. Grace abandoned school, took 2 jobs, and sent most of her earnings home. She did not consider domestic work beneath her. Honest work was honest work. What she refused to accept was being treated as if the uniform erased the woman wearing it. Her interview at the Kang mansion lasted 6 minutes. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Han, explained the rules. Mr. Kang's study is cleaned only on Tuesdays. Never move anything on his desk. Never enter the west corridor after 10. Never speak to him unless he speaks first. Grace raised her hand. Mrs. Han stared at it. This is not a classroom. I know, but there are so many rules that I thought there might be an examination afterward. Mrs. Han did not smile. Grace was hired anyway, mainly because 3 other maids had resigned that month. On her first morning, she found Tae-jun's breakfast untouched outside his study. At lunchtime, it was still there. At dinner, another untouched tray appeared. Grace carried it inside. Tae-jun sat behind a vast mahogany desk, reading financial reports. Silver threaded the black hair at his temples, but age had not softened him. His face was sharp, controlled, and striking enough to explain why several employees suddenly developed poor coordination whenever he walked past them. He looked at the tray, then at Grace. Who gave you permission to enter? No one. Then why are you here? Because Mrs. Han says you haven't eaten since yesterday. That is not your concern. Grace placed the tray on his desk. It became my concern when the soup started developing abandonment issues. Tae-jun slowly lowered the document in his hand. Nobody spoke to him like that. Even his mother usually warmed up with 10 minutes of polite conversation before attacking his life choices. What is your name? Grace Mensah. Are you always this disrespectful, Miss Mensah? No, sir. Sometimes I'm asleep. The room became very quiet. Grace wondered if she had just broken the record for the shortest employment in Korean domestic service history. Then Tae-jun looked at the soup. Leave. She bowed politely. Please eat before dismissing me tomorrow. Mrs. Han put considerable effort into the meal. Grace closed the door behind her. Tae-jun stared at it for several seconds. Then he ate everything. Grace did not transform the mansion overnight. She irritated it into changing. She opened curtains that had remained closed for years. She placed fresh flowers in the entrance hall and persuaded the kitchen staff to play music while preparing meals. When Mrs. Han warned her that Tae-jun disliked noise, Grace lowered the volume by exactly 1 point and called it compromise. She also moved an antique chair in his study. Tae-jun noticed immediately. Why is that chair beside the window? Because it was facing the wall. That is where it has always been. Then it has suffered enough. It is a chair. Even furniture deserves something better to look at. Tae-jun ordered her to return it. The following morning, the chair remained beside the window. He said nothing. Soon, Tae-jun began taking his afternoon tea in that chair. Grace never mentioned it, although the satisfied expression on her face was becoming increasingly difficult to tolerate. His mother noticed the changes during her weekly visit. Madame Kang Sun-hee entered the mansion wearing an elegant cream hanbok and stopped when she heard laughter coming from the kitchen. Is someone celebrating? No, mother. Then why do your employees sound happy? Tae-jun looked toward the kitchen, where Grace was teaching the cook how to prepare Ghanaian jollof rice, while refusing to admit that the first attempt contained enough pepper to negotiate with the dead. We hired a new maid. Madame Kang studied her son. You hired a maid, and now you are standing near the kitchen, listening to her laugh. I was walking past. You have been walking past for 4 minutes. Tae-jun continued down the corridor. His mother smiled. Grace soon discovered that the feared Mafia boss performed one quiet act of kindness every Thursday. At precisely 7 in the evening, a van arrived to collect boxes of food, clothing, and medicine. Tae-jun's organization delivered them to orphanages and shelters across Seoul. His name never appeared on the donations. Why keep it secret? Grace asked after helping load the boxes. Kindness performed for applause is advertising. You could visit the children. His expression changed. Only slightly, but Grace saw it. I don't belong around children. Children don't care where you belong. They care whether you show up. Tae-jun walked away without responding. 2 Thursdays later, Grace saw him enter the van. He returned after midnight with a small paper drawing folded inside his jacket pocket. He thought no one noticed. Grace did. Their connection grew through moments neither of them was willing to name. She left dinner in his study when meetings ran late. He quietly doubled the amount the mansion paid for her father's medical insurance, disguising it as an employee benefit. When she discovered what he had done, she marched into his study. I don't accept charity. It is not charity. Then what is it? Employee retention. I clean your house. You also argue with me before breakfast. Replacing that level of irritation would be expensive. Grace tried not to smile. She failed. Tae-jun watched the smile appear, warm and unguarded, and felt something shift inside a part of him he had kept locked for decades. Then, one stormy evening, the lights in the mansion went out. The backup generator should have activated immediately. It did not. Tae-jun rose from his desk as footsteps sounded in the west corridor. Not the measured steps of his security guards. These were fast, deliberate, armed. The study door burst open. Grace stood on the other side, breathing heavily. Sir, there are men inside the house. A gunshot echoed from downstairs. Tae-jun reached for the weapon beneath his desk, but Grace grabbed his arm. There's another one behind the curtain. Tae-jun turned as a masked attacker stepped from the darkness. The struggle lasted seconds. A second gunshot shattered the window. Tae-jun forced Grace to the floor and shielded her with his body until his security team stormed into the room. When the danger was over, Tae-jun discovered blood on Grace's sleeve. His controlled expression broke. You're hurt. It's only glass. You should have hidden. Grace looked directly into his eyes. And leave you here alone? No one had ever asked Tae-jun that question before. Not his family. Not his soldiers. Not the men who claimed they would die for him. Leave you here alone? He looked at the woman kneeling amid broken glass, and for the first time in years, the possibility of losing someone frightened him more than the possibility of dying. Outside the damaged study, Min-suk stood in the darkened corridor. He had seen the way his uncle held Grace. He had seen fear on Kang Tae-jun's face. And Min-suk understood something before either Tae-jun or Grace did. The black maid was no longer merely an employee. She was becoming the one person powerful enough to change the future of the Kang family. And if Min-suk intended to inherit that future, Grace Mensah would have to go. By sunrise, the broken windows had been covered, the blood had been cleaned from the floor, and 3 of the attackers were in police custody. The 4th had not survived long enough to reveal who sent them. Grace sat on the edge of a guest room bed while a private doctor removed a thin piece of glass from her upper arm. It will need 4 stitches, the doctor said. Grace looked at the needle. Can we negotiate 3? No. What if I promise not to complain? You have been complaining since I entered the room. That is because your bedside manner needs professional development. Across the room, Tae-jun almost smiled. Almost. He had refused to leave while the doctor treated her. He stood beside the window with his arms folded, still wearing the white shirt stained with Grace's blood. His security chief, Park Dae-sung, entered quietly. Dae-sung had protected Tae-jun for 18 years. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s who rarely displayed emotion and trusted approximately 6 people on Earth. Grace had recently become number 7. The estate is secure, Dae-sung reported. Someone disabled the generator and opened the service entrance from inside. Tae-jun's expression hardened. So they had help. Yes, sir. Question everyone. Dae-sung hesitated. There is one more thing. The attackers entered through the west corridor. They knew the location of your study and the exact time the night guards changed positions. Only a small number of people possessed that information. Every one of them belonged to the Kang organization. Find the traitor, Tae-jun said. Dae-sung bowed and left. Grace studied Tae-jun's stained shirt. You should change. You were injured protecting me, and you are worried about my clothes? I am worried about the carpet. Mrs. Han said it was imported from Italy. The carpet can be replaced. So can the shirt. You cannot. The humor disappeared from Grace's face. Tae-jun seemed almost surprised by his own words. He turned toward the window, but not before Grace saw what he was trying to conceal. Fear. That night, Tae-jun ordered Grace to take 2 weeks away from work. She lasted 4 days. On the 5th morning, he found her rearranging flowers in the entrance hall. I instructed you to rest. I rested. For 4 days. It was exhausting. I needed a break. You were nearly killed. And now I am nearly bored. Tae-jun stared at her bandaged arm. Grace placed the flowers on the table. Sir, I am grateful for your concern, but sitting alone in that room made me feel more like a patient than resting ever made me feel human. Then you may remain downstairs, but you are not working. What should I do? Anything that does not involve lifting, cleaning, cooking, or arguing with me. That last restriction seems unreasonable. He walked away before she could see him smile. Min-suk watched their exchange from the staircase. He had visited the mansion to express his concern after the attack. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and carried an expensive bottle of whiskey. Tae-jun did not drink. Min-suk's attention settled on Grace's bandaged arm. You are fortunate my uncle was there to protect you, he said. Grace turned toward him. Actually, I warned your uncle about the man hiding inside his study. I heard. Then we were fortunate to have each other. Min-suk smiled, but warmth never reached his eyes. You appear to have become comfortable here very quickly. It is easier when people speak plainly. And what do you believe my uncle sees when he looks at you? Grace recognized the insult hiding beneath the polite question. A member of his household staff. Good. It would be unfortunate if someone misunderstood kindness for something more. Before Grace could answer, Tae-jun's voice came from behind them. The only misunderstanding here, Min-suk, is your belief that you are permitted to interrogate my employees. Min-suk's posture stiffened. I was making conversation. You are not good at it. Tae-jun walked past him and held out his uninjured hand to Grace. Come, my mother wants your opinion about the charity dinner. Grace took his hand. Neither of them noticed the look Min-suk gave their joined fingers. But Madame Kang noticed everything. She had organized a dinner to raise money for the orphanages Tae-jun secretly supported. Grace helped combine Korean and Ghanaian elements for the event, insisting that generosity did not need to feel like a funeral. The mansion filled with music, flowers, and guests for the first time in years. Grace wore an emerald green dress borrowed from Mrs. Han's daughter. Her natural twists were pinned away from her face with small gold ornaments. When she entered the ballroom, Tae-jun forgot what a senior judge had been saying to him. The judge followed his gaze. You know, Kang, staring becomes less discreet when the entire room is afraid to stand between you and the person you're staring at. I was not staring. Of course not. Across the ballroom, a wealthy investor named Choi Sang-min approached Grace. He looked at her dress, then at the serving staff. Bring me another drink. I'm not working tonight. A maid is always working inside her employer's house. Grace's expression remained calm. The bar is 6 steps behind you. I have confidence in your ability to survive the journey. Choi caught her wrist. You people become arrogant very quickly when someone gives you access to wealth. Tae-jun appeared beside him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Release her. Choi immediately removed his hand. I didn't realize she belonged to you. She does not belong to anyone. Tae-jun stepped between them. But you are standing in my home. You will apologize to Ms. Mensah and leave. Choi's face reddened as the surrounding guests watched. You would embarrass a business partner over a servant. No, I am ending a business relationship because you do not know how to treat another human being. Choi muttered an apology and left. Grace looked at Tae-jun. I could have handled him. I know. Then why did you intervene? Because you should not have to defend your humanity in my house. Grace's eyes softened. Tae-jun offered her his hand. Dance with me. Her eyebrows rose. Is that an order? No. Good. Because your orders are becoming less effective. She accepted his hand. The feared head of the Kang organization walked onto the dance floor with his black maid while dozens of powerful guests watched in stunned silence. Tae-jun danced with the rigid concentration of a man attempting to negotiate with music. You can relax, Grace whispered. I am relaxed. Your shoulders are currently in a disagreement with gravity. He exhaled. She moved closer, guiding him gently. Around them, whispers spread. Tae-jun heard every one of them and ignored them all. For one song, he was not a mafia boss, an heirless patriarch, or the owner of an empire. He was simply a lonely man holding the first woman who had made his mansion feel like a home. After the guests left, they found themselves sitting beside the study window. The antique chair Grace had rescued from the wall now faced the moonlit garden. Why did you never marry? She asked. I almost did. What happened? 20 years ago, I was attacked. I survived, but the injuries required several operations. The woman I intended to marry visited me once. Grace remained quiet. She said she could not spend her life waiting for my enemies to finish what they started. That must have hurt. It was practical. Something can be practical and cruel at the same time. Tae-jun looked down at his hands. Several years later, a specialist confirmed that the damage from the attack had left me unable to father children. By then, it seemed appropriate. Men like me should not bring children into a life like this. Is that what you believe? It is what I have accepted. Grace turned toward him. Acceptance and peace are not always the same thing. The words reached a place money, power, and time had failed to heal. What about you? He asked. Why are you alone? I spent years taking care of everyone else. My younger brothers needed school fees. My father needed treatment. Every time I tried to build my own life, someone I loved needed help. And no one helped you? I learned not to wait. Tae-jun reached for her hand. Perhaps you should not have had to learn that. Their first kiss was quiet. There was no dramatic music, no sudden declaration, and no promise that love would solve the danger surrounding them. It was simply two people who had been alone for different reasons finally admitting that they did not want to be alone that night. Their relationship remained hidden, for the next 3 months. Grace refused to be treated like a secret inside the mansion, but she also refused to become entertainment for Tae-jun's enemies. Behind closed doors, she remained exactly herself. She still corrected him. She still moved his furniture. She once replaced his midnight whiskey with warm ginger tea, and informed him that glaring at it would not produce alcohol. Tae-jun began coming home earlier. He ate with the household staff twice a week and visited the orphanage every Thursday instead of sending boxes. Then Grace began waking before sunrise with nausea. She blamed the kitchen's fermented soybean stew. The cook blamed Grace's Ghanaian pepper sauce. Mrs. Han blamed Tae-jun. Mrs. Han was correct. Grace bought 3 pregnancy tests from 3 different pharmacies, as if purchasing them separately would make the result less terrifying. All 3 were positive. She sat on her bathroom floor for nearly 20 minutes. Pregnancy was supposed to be impossible. Tae-jun's diagnosis had been clear. Yet her body was telling her something different. At the hospital, the obstetrician studied the ultrasound screen for an unusually long time. Grace gripped the edge of the bed. "Is something wrong?" The doctor adjusted the monitor. "Ms. Mensah, there are 3 gestational sacs." Grace blinked. "What does that mean?" "You are carrying triplets." Grace stared at the screen. 1 pregnancy managed to become 3. The doctor smiled. "Apparently your babies believe in exceeding expectations." That evening, Grace entered Tae-jun's study carrying the ultrasound image and 3 positive tests. He noticed her trembling hands. "What happened?" "I need you to listen before you react." She placed the tests on his desk. Tae-jun looked at them without understanding. Then he saw the ultrasound. The color drained from his face. "I'm pregnant," Grace said. "The doctor confirmed it this afternoon." His gaze remained fixed on the image. "How many?" Grace swallowed. 3. The room went completely still. Tae-jun picked up the ultrasound with hands that had never trembled during a negotiation. He looked at the 3 tiny shapes. Then he placed the image down. "This is impossible." Grace's expression changed. "I know what the doctor told you, but I have never been with another man since we began this relationship." "I didn't say you had. You thought it. I thought that someone has lied to us." He stood and reached for his phone. "Dae-sung, arrange another medical examination. Tonight, independent specialists, private facility, and no connection to my previous doctor." Grace stared at him. "You believe me?" Tae-jun crossed the room and took her face gently between his hands. "I believe you. What I do not believe is a report that asks me to doubt the woman who risked her life for mine." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I'm frightened." "So am I." It was the first time she had ever heard Kang Tae-jun admit fear. He lowered himself in front of her and placed one hand against her still flat stomach. 3. I don't know how to hold one baby. You have several months to learn. I will learn everything. Babies do not follow orders. Then they will be the first members of this family who don't." Grace laughed through her tears. Behind the partially open study door, someone silently stepped away. Within 48 hours, rumors spread through the Kang organization. The black maid was pregnant. She claimed the 60-year-old boss was the father, and she was carrying not 1 possible heir, but 3. At the center of those whispers stood Min-suk. He told the senior members that Grace had targeted a lonely old man. He reminded them that Tae-jun had been medically declared infertile. Then the independent specialist called. The original report had not merely been mistaken. Someone had substituted Tae-jun's laboratory results. His real records showed that he had always been capable of fathering children. Dae-sung placed both reports on Tae-jun's desk. Only 3 people had access to the original examination. He said, the specialist, the laboratory director, and the person who paid them. Tae-jun studied the name attached to the payment. Kang Min-suk. His nephew had not only stolen years of hope from him, he had built his entire future upon the belief that Tae-jun would die without a child. Upstairs, Grace stood at her bedroom window, unaware that Min-suk had already given one final instruction to the traitor inside the mansion. Get her out before my uncle announces those babies as his heirs. Tae-jun did not confront Min-suk immediately. Angry men made mistakes. Tae-jun had survived for 60 years because he allowed his enemies to become comfortable before he closed the door behind them. He ordered Dae-sung to trace every payment connected to the falsified medical report. What they discovered was worse than expected. Min-suk had bribed the fertility specialist, paid the laboratory director, and arranged the attack inside the mansion. He had wanted Tae-jun frightened enough to accelerate the succession without killing him and triggering a criminal investigation. Grace had disrupted that plan when she spotted the attacker behind the curtain. Now her unborn children threatened everything Min-suk believed belonged to him. Grace's pregnancy became impossible to conceal. By her 4th month, gossip had spread beyond the organization and reached the tabloids. Black Maid claims to be carrying Mafia bosses' heirs. Love story or billion-dollar trap. Reporters surrounded the mansion gates. Photographers followed Grace to medical appointments. Commentators who had never met her discussed her character, body, and intentions on television. Min-suk encouraged every rumor. Some claimed Grace had manipulated Tae-jun. Others accused her of becoming pregnant to escape domestic work. One newspaper described her as an ambitious foreign employee who had discovered the fastest route into the Kang fortune. Grace read the article at breakfast. I am impressed, she said. Tae-jun lowered his coffee. By what? They turned me into an international criminal before I finish my toast. You should not read those things. I wanted to know what terrible thing I did overnight. Tae-jun folded the newspaper and handed it to Dae-sung. Find out who owns this publication. Grace pointed her fork at him. You cannot purchase every company that insults me. I don't intend to purchase it. Good. I intend to bankrupt it. Tae-jun. He looked at her innocently. We discussed threatening people before breakfast. You discussed it. I disagreed. Despite her humor, the accusations hurt. Grace had sacrificed her education to care for her father. She had worked honestly, protected Tae-jun, and loved him before she knew she carried his heirs. Now strangers had reduced her entire life to a calculated pregnancy. Tae-jun found her crying alone that evening. She wiped her face when he entered. I'm fine. No. You are attempting to protect me from your pain. I don't want you starting a war every time someone says something cruel. I have started wars for considerably less. That is not as comforting as you think. He sat beside her. Grace placed his hand on the gentle curve of her stomach. One of the babies moved beneath his palm. Tae-jun froze. Then another movement followed. His eyes filled with wonder. They're real, he whispered. Grace looked at him. Did you think I swallowed 3 alarm clocks? I knew they were real. I simply... He could not finish. The empire, the wealth, and the fear attached to his name suddenly felt insignificant beside 3 tiny heartbeats. I will not allow them to inherit this hatred, he said. Then don't give it to them. That sentence would eventually change the Kang organization forever. First, Tae-jun had to confront the man who had built his future upon Tae-jun's loneliness. He called a formal succession meeting. Every senior member of the organization assembled inside the Kang Maritime boardroom. Min-suk arrived confidently, believing the meeting concerned his official appointment as successor. Instead, the doors opened and Grace entered beside Tae-jun. She wore a simple royal blue maternity dress. At 6 months pregnant with triplets, Her condition was unmistakable. Whispers moved around the table. Min-suk rose. "Uncle, this is a private family meeting." Tae-jun pulled out a chair for Grace. "She is carrying 3 members of this family. Sit down." Min-suk's expression hardened. "You cannot seriously believe those children are yours." Tae-jun placed 3 folders on the table. The first contained his genuine fertility results. The second contained bank transfers from Min-suk to the corrupt specialist. The third connected Min-suk to the attack on the mansion. "You paid a doctor to convince me I could never become a father," Tae-jun said. "You stole 15 years of truth because you were afraid of children who did not yet exist." Min-suk looked around for support. "I protected the organization. You were aging without an heir. I prepared my entire life to replace you. You prepared to inherit my chair. You never prepared to carry its responsibility." Min-suk pointed at Grace. "You would throw away your own blood for a maid." Tae-jun stood. The room fell silent. "You call her a maid because you believe service makes someone inferior. Grace protected me, while men in this room protected their positions. She brought dignity into my home, honesty into my life, and 3 children into a future I thought was empty." He looked at every person around the table. "She is not asking for a place in this family. I am telling you that she already has one. Anyone who insults her or questions my children may leave with Min-suk." Nobody moved. Tae-jun turned to his nephew. "You are removed from Kang Maritime and from every position connected to this family. Your access has been revoked. The evidence against you has been delivered to the authorities." Min-suk's face twisted. "You will regret choosing her." "No," Tae-jun answered. "I regret that I ever chose you." Security escorted Min-suk from the building. But Min-suk had prepared one final move. 2 months later, while Tae-jun attended a meeting with federal investigators, the traitor inside the mansion approached Grace. It was Lee Sang-ho, the deputy head of household security. He told Grace that Tae-jun had been injured and persuaded her to enter a waiting vehicle. Grace realized the truth when the driver passed the hospital. She reached for her phone. Sang-ho seized it. "Mr. Min-suk only wants insurance," he said. "Once your children are born, your position becomes permanent. My children are not positions. To this family, that is exactly what they are." Grace refused to panic. During the struggle, she activated the emergency transmitter Dae-sung had hidden inside her bracelet. Tae-jun received the alert 12 minutes later. The vehicle was intercepted before it reached the city limits, but Grace had begun experiencing severe pain. When Tae-jun arrived, she was sitting beside the road with one arm wrapped around her stomach. Blood from a cut on her hand stained his sleeve when he lifted her. "The babies," she whispered. "Something is wrong." He carried her into his car. At the hospital, doctors rushed Grace into surgery. That was how Kang Tae-jun found himself standing in a white shirt marked with blood, waiting to discover whether the family he had only just found would survive. His mother prayed beside him. Dae-sung stared at the floor. Then Min-suk appeared at the end of the corridor, escorted by 2 police officers. He had been brought to the hospital to identify Sang-ho after both men were taken into custody. Min-suk looked at Tae-jun's shirt and smiled bitterly. "So this is the family you chose." Tae-jun walked toward him. The officers prepared to intervene. But Tae-jun did not strike his nephew. The old Tae-jun might have answered betrayal with violence. The man waiting for 3 children understood that every cycle continued until someone had the courage to end it. "I spent my life believing fear was power," he said. "Look at you, Min-suk. You feared children who had not even been born. Fear has made you smaller than all of them." The officers led Min-suk away. Minutes later, a doctor emerged. "Mr. Kang, the delivery has begun. Ms. Mensah has lost blood, but she is stable. The neonatal team is prepared. Can I see her? She has been asking for you. Inside the operating room, Grace looked exhausted and frightened. Tae-jun took her hand. You found me. I will always find you. You said you don't make promises. I didn't have 3 children listening before. At 4:12 in the morning, the first baby arrived. A boy. He announced himself with a cry so powerful that one nurse laughed. Strong lungs. At 4:14, the second baby arrived. A girl with a serious expression and a tiny hand that immediately closed around the doctor's finger. At 4:17, the third baby arrived. Another boy, smaller than his siblings but determined, breathing steadily as the neonatal team examined him. Tae-jun stood between the bassinets with tears running openly down his face. Grace watched him. Should I tell your organization that the great Kang Tae-jun is crying? Tell everyone. And if they laugh, they're unemployed. Grace laughed weakly. Tae-jun returned to her side and pressed his forehead against hers. For decades, he had thought his greatest achievement was building an empire no enemy could destroy. He had been wrong. His greatest achievement was standing in a hospital room with nothing left to hide. They named the children Kang Jun, Kang Nari, and Kang Minjae. Each child also received a Ghanaian middle name chosen to honor Grace's family. Fatherhood dismantled Tae-jun more effectively than any enemy ever had. The man who once controlled entire shipping ports could not control 3 feeding schedules. He attended meetings with milk stains on his suits and once threatened to fire a baby monitor because it kept making noise. Grace reminded him that the monitor was doing its job. He promoted it. More importantly, Tae-jun kept the promise he made when he first felt the babies move. He cooperated with investigators, dismantled the criminal side of his organization, and turned Kang Maritime into a completely legitimate business. The transition cost him money and influence, but it gave his children something more valuable than an empire built on fear. It gave them a father who could come home without blood on his hands. 1 year later, Tae-jun and Grace married in the mansion garden. The ceremony blended Korean and Ghanaian traditions. Grace wore an elegant ivory gown accented with hand-woven Ghanaian fabric. Tae-jun wore a black suit with subtle traditional Korean embroidery. Their 3 children sat near the front with Madame Kang, who cried loudly enough to compete with the music. During his vows, Tae-jun looked at Grace and said, "I believed my name would end because I had no heir. Then you taught me that a legacy is not the person who inherits your power. It is the love, safety, and truth you leave behind." Grace smiled through her tears. "You gave me a home," he continued. "Then you filled it 3 times over." That evening, laughter traveled through every corridor of the mansion. The curtains were open. The kitchen was filled with Ghanaian and Korean food. The antique chair remained beside the study window, and Kang Tae-jun, who had once eaten alone at a table built for 30, sat surrounded by his wife, his mother, and 3 children fighting over the same spoon. He had spent 60 years believing power meant never needing anyone. Grace taught him the truth. Real power was having people to protect without trying to control them. Real legacy was not blood, wealth, or a powerful family name. It was becoming someone your children would be proud to call their father. And sometimes the person the world overlooks as just a maid is the person carrying enough courage, love, and life to transform an entire empire. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and tell us in the comments which moment affected you the most. Subscribe and turn on your notifications for more emotional Afro, Korean stories about love, family, and unexpected second chances. Share this video with someone who believes it is never too late for life to give you a new beginning.